Here's a quick demo of Figma. Figma is a web-based graphics editing and user interface design app. I'm going to create a prototype app for my podcast. I've already downloaded and installed the free version of Figma on my local machine. Let me click New Design File. I'll give this project a name. Learn the Technology app. I'm going to start by creating a frame for my app. I'll click on the Frame tool. I'll frame that out, but I'm going to set the default dimensions to iPhone 16. Why not? I'm going to create the header for the app. I'll use the rectangle tool, create a rectangle at the top. I'll size that to the width of the frame. And I'll manually set the height to 60 pixels. Now I'm going to overlay some text onto the header rectangle. Use the text tool. Learn the technology with Brandon Krakowski. Let me align the entire text field within the frame, and then I'll align the text within the text field. Let me change the font to 14 and then bold. Move that up a little bit. Now I'm going to create a rectangle for my first piece of content. I'll size that right here, almost the width of the frame itself. Align that in the center. For the actual content, I'll use the text tool. Paste a brief description of the podcast here into a text field. Let me change the layout. I'll set the dimensions of the text field to 340. Set the alignment to center. I'll change this to regular. I'll make it a little smaller as well, 12. There it is, brief description. I'm going to go over here. I'm actually going to group those two items. I'm going to group the content text and the rectangle behind it into a single group. I'll rename the group. Rename. About the podcast. That contains the text field and the rectangle behind it. Let me select the rectangle tool again. I'm going to create a smaller rectangle to represent a button. I'll select the text tool again. The text on the button will be About Brandon. This button will take us somewhere else for more information. Just resize the rectangle. Let's move that over a little bit. Let me check the font. I'll stick with 12. Let me make that bold. I'm going to group the rectangle and the text on top of it. Give that a new name. About Brandon button. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. Left align it with the content above it. Now I want to duplicate this entire frame. I'll select the frame. On a Mac, I'll hit Command D. That'll duplicate the frame. You can see now I have another frame in my app. What I want to do is change the content in frame 2. I'll select this text field. Just going to create a brief description of Brandon Krakowski. Let me change the name of the group in frame 2. This is About Brandon. Also going to change this button. This will take us back to frame 1. So I'll change this to About the Podcast. Change the grouping name. Rename. About Podcast button. Now I have my 2 frames. I want to add interactivity via those buttons. So I'll select this About Brandon button. I'm going to go to Prototype over here, drag this little circle to frame 2. The trigger will be on tap, navigate to frame 2, and the animation, I'll select Smart Animate. And I'll do the same thing with the About the Podcast button in frame 2. Drag this circle over to frame 1. Same options, except this will navigate to frame 1. We're using Smart Animate again. I want to see this in action. I'll click the play button here. Let that load in the app. Here it is on an iPhone. See the podcast information. If I click About Brandon, it takes me to that information. And then if I click About the Podcast, it takes me back to the podcast information. Now I want to share this with other people. I'm going to click Share Prototype. To invite collaborators, I have to first move this draft to my projects. I'll do that now. Let me click Move. Select my team project and move again. That moves this draft project to my team. Now let me go to Share Prototype again. I want to share this with anyone. So I'm going to click Anyone here. That looks good. This will allow anybody to access the link. If you want, you can password protect it here. I'm going to go back here. Just going to copy the link. I'll paste that into a new browser tab. Let that load. Then I can see the prototype and I can interact with it. About the podcast, About Brandon. And here's the prototype of the app for my podcast using Figma.